Hello. In this video, I read out the Japanese folktales in English. I would be happy if you could press the channel subscription and thumbs up now. Let's begin. The story begins in Copenhagen, in East Street, not far from the New Royal Market. A house was crowded with many customers. In human relationships, if you invite customers from time to time, you will eventually be invited by customers. Half of the customers were already at work on their karuta. The other half were waiting with bated breath to see what would come of the greeting that the hostess's wife had just said. Now, what shall we do next? The customers were already chatting away, and some of them talked about the Middle Ages. One of them claimed that those times were incomparably better than today's. Mr. Knapp, the lawman, was so enthusiastic about this that he immediately made his wife his wife. The two of them then began to make a loud attack on the modernist theory that Ørsted had written in his annual journal. According to the law counselor, the reign of King Hans of Denmark was the best and happiest period since the beginning of mankind. Famous Danish physicist, 1777 to 1851. Johann II, 1481 to 1513. Married to Christine, daughter of Elector Ernst of Saxony. He was also King of Norway and Sweden. The conversation continued like this, with the flowers blooming all around, and the evening paper arriving in between, which only brought a brief pause. But there was nothing particularly interesting in the paper, so the conversation continued as usual. So we decided to go into the waiting room at the front. There, we found a gown, a walking stick, an umbrella, and large shoes already placed on top of the shoes. We saw two women sitting at the desk. One was still young, but the other was quite old. At first glance, you might think they were maids waiting to greet an elderly customer, or the wife of a monk. But on closer inspection, you could see that neither of them were ordinary maids. Both of them had hands too delicate for that, and their appearance, their manners, and their clothes were too elegant. But even their clothes were very different. These two were actually girls. The younger one was not the goddess of happiness, but one of her attendant servants, and her role was to bring little gifts of happiness. The older one had a rather troubled face. She was a witch of worries. She was always confident, and she would go anywhere and do her work. And she knew that this was the best way to do it. The two were talking to each other about where they had been today and what they had done. The attendant servant of the goddess of happiness had done just 2 or 3 very trivial things. For example, he helped a newly purchased hag get caught in a sudden shower, and he received a gift from an unknown person for an honest man, and that was about it. But after that, there was one other thing he had left to talk about, which was a little strange. Well, I guess I'll tell you about it while I'm at it, said the servant who was Happiness's attendant. Today is my birthday. And to celebrate, my master has entrusted me with a pair of shoes. He wants me to give them to the people of humanity. The shoes have a special feature. Whoever puts them on will be transported immediately to the time or place he would most like to live in, and all his wishes about that time or place will be fulfilled. And so, it seems, humans can be happy in this world. The worried girl said, "No, wait a moment. Whoever puts on the shoes will surely be very unhappy. And he will also be eager to take them off." "Well, you don't have to think that far," the other said, sounding full of anger. "Now, I'm going to put the slippers of happiness here at the door. If someone accidentally puts them on, they will immediately become a happy person, whether they like it or not. So what?" That was the story of the two women. The second counselor was already well into the night. Preoccupied with the time of King Hans, Mr. Knapp was about to return home. However, fate arranged for this man to mistakenly wear the slippers of happiness for his own. So the counselor went out onto the East Street without thinking. And the slippers soon took effect, and Mr. Knapp was instantly transported back to the time of King Hans, 350 years ago. The counselor immediately put both feet into the mud on the road. Of course, that was a long time ago, and there was no stone-paved sidewalk in the city. My, this is amazing. My, what a dirty town, said the counselor. Why have they lost all the sidewalks? Why have they erased all the lights? The moon was not yet very high, and the air was quite heavy, so that it seemed as if everything around was melting into the darkness without a word. At the corner of the next alley, a dim lamp hung in front of a statue of the Virgin Mary, but it was just as dark. He stood just below it, and only by looking up could he make out the painted statues of the Virgin Mary and the faithful. This must be a house selling art. The sun had set, and they had forgotten to take down their sign, thought the counselor. Two people dressed in traditional clothing passed nearby. Oh, what are they looking like? They must have just returned from a military expedition, the counselor muttered to himself. All of a sudden, the sounds of drums and flutes were heard, and torches began to burn brightly. The counselor stopped in shock, and at that moment a strange procession passed right in front of his nose. In the front came a group of drummers, beating their drums with apparent amusement. Following them was a group of zuio carrying long bows and crossbows. The most important-looking person in the procession was a monk. The counselor was surprised, wondering what time it was and who could be walking in this fairy tale costume procession, and asked the people in the procession. "It's the great priest of Shelland," someone answered. "If it was the archbishop's idea, that's ridiculous." The counselor sighed and shook his head. What kind of archbishop could there be? Muttering to himself, without looking left or right, the counselor walked through Higashidori and came out at Takabashi Square. However, he could not find the large bridge leading to Miyagi Square. He finally found the Asai stream and came out on its bank. Soon he met two young men who looked like boatmen coming in a small boat. "Are you going to cross to Hallmen?" the boatman asked. "Are you going to Hallmen?" the counselor echoed. After all, this man also didn't know exactly what time period he was in. "I'm going from Christianshavn to Koenmarktstrasse." This time the man looked at him in surprise. "Where is the bridge anyway?" the counselor asked. "First of all, it's a shame we didn't leave the lights on here. And it's so muddy around here, it's like walking through a swamp." The more he talked like this, the more the boatman couldn't understand him. "I can't understand your Bornholm dialect at all," the counselor yelled in a tantrum. Then he turned and started walking away. An island in the Baltic Sea. The island's dialect was different. But no matter how far he walked, the counselor could not find a bridge. There was nothing resembling a bridge. "This place is really terrible," the counselor said. He had never felt more sorry for his age than he had that night. Well, in this situation, the best thing to do would be to take a cab, the counselor thought. So, where could he find a cab? It didn't look like he could find one either. "I'd better go back to the New Royal Market. There would be plenty of carriages there. Otherwise, it would be impossible to get back to Christianshavn." So he went back and started walking toward the East Street. He had just about passed through when the moon rose. "Oh my, what a thought, they must have had to build something like scaffolding here," cried the counselor as he found the East Gate. At that time, there was a gate at the end of East Street. Anyway, he looked for an exit and passed through it, and came out onto the street where the Royal New Market is now. But it was just a vast grassland. A few shabby lodging houses for Dutch sailors stood on the opposite bank, and the place was also called Orandapara. I don't know if I'm sick, or maybe I'm drunk, cried the counselor. Anyway, what a mess. He was convinced that he must be ill, and turned him back again. He trudged along the road, looking more closely at the houses around him. Most of them were wooden huts, and some had straw roofs. Oh, it just feels so strange, the counselor sighed. But I've only had a glass of coffee, and it doesn't seem to have calmed me down. Plus, I've had a bad cold, and it's all just a bit of a misfortune. I wonder if I should go back again, and tell my master's chargé d'affaires wife what he's complaining about. But that would be silly. And I'm not sure if she's still awake. As he said this, he looked in the direction of the house, but he couldn't find it. It's terrible. I can't find East Street at all. I can't see a single shop. All I can see are shabby, dilapidated huts. It's as if I've been to Liascol or Linstead. Oh, I'm sick. I can't be shy. But where on earth is the charge d'affaires house? It's definitely not the same now. And there's still no one inside. I'm awake. I'm really sick. Then the counselor came to an open door of a house. A light was streaming in through the gap onto the street. This was a cheap inn, half a tavern. The inside was like a Holstein-style peasant's kitchen. There were many people inside, including sailors, townspeople from Copenhagen, and a few old men. They were all holding mugs of beer, talking away, and didn't seem to notice the guests who had just come in. The counselor said to the woman who was waiting for the guests, "I'm sorry, but I'm feeling very sick. Would you be so kind as to hire a cab to take me to Christianshavn?" The woman looked at the counselor suspiciously and shook her head. Then she spoke to him in German. The counselor then realized that the lady did not know Danish. So he repeated his order, this time in German. His words and his dress led the lady to assume that the customer was a foreigner. Seeing that he looked unwell, she immediately brought him a jug of water. The water had a strange, salty taste. And yet it had been drawn from the fountain outside. The counselor put his hands over his head, sighed deeply and thought over the strange events that had just taken place. "Is that today's asterisk Dane?" he asked, looking at the large paper the lady was about to take away. Asterisk, the evening paper published in Copenhagen, 1805-43. The official, not understanding what his visitor was saying, handed the paper over in silence. It was a scroll depicting a strange aerial phenomenon that had long ago appeared in the town of Kyoran. "This is quite an old piece of paper," said the counselor, and extremely amused at his unexpected find. "How did you get your hands on this rare piece of paper?" "It's quite interesting, although the story is purely fairy tale. Today, similar aerial phenomena to this one are believed to be a misinterpretation of the northern lights, probably caused by the action of electricity." The people sitting nearby who had heard his story looked at him in amazement. Then one of them rose, respectfully removed his hat, and said very solemnly, "Sir, I am sure you are a great scholar." "You are most welcome," answered the counselor. "I have only just told you a few things which everyone should know. Respect is a virtue," the man said, in a Latin tone. "I do, however, offer a different view to your theory. However, I will suspend my criticism for the moment." "Excuse me. Who are you?" asked the counselor. "I am a scripture scholar," the man replied. That was enough for the counselor, whose title and dress were well suited to it. This must have been an old village teacher. The counselor thought that he was something different, something you often see in Jutland. "This is definitely not a place for scholars to talk," the man continued. "But please be honest. You are, of course, a great reader of old books, aren't you?" Quote, Yes, yes, that is true, the counselor replied. I also love reading useful old books, but I also read a lot of old books. The only thing that's bothersome is the stories of the day, and even if I don't go out of my way to read them in a book, I get bored of everyday things. What do you mean, stories of the day? The wise man asked curiously. No, I'm talking about the new novels that are popular these days. Yes, said the monk, smiling. They're also very clever, and are widely read in the court. The king is particularly fond of the tale of Ifuin and Gordian. Who wrote the story of King Arthur and the Knights of the Quest? He enjoys telling the tale to his servants. In the Danish poet Holberg's Danish history, there is a story about King Hans's witty exchange with his favorite minister, Otto Rude, about the relationship between king and his subjects. The Tale of Days is a life story written by the mother of the writer Heber. I haven't read it yet, said the counselor. It must be a new book published by Heibel. No, not Heibel. It was published by Gottfried von Gaiman. The bachelor replied. Oh, is he the author? The counselor asked. Gottfried von Gaiman is a very old name. He is the man who started the printing business in Denmark during the time of King Hans. Yes, he was the first printer in the country. The bachelor replied. So far everything was going well. Then one of the townspeople started talking about an epidemic that had occurred 3 years ago. But it was 1484. The counselor thought he was talking about the cholera that had ravaged the 1830s. The conversation then somehow made sense. The Pirate War of 1490 had happened quite recently, so this also came up in conversation. The man said that an English pirate ship had also robbed the same war for ship. Then the counselor, who knew the events of 1801 well, went along with the story and launched an attack on the English. This was a good thing, but the rest of the story didn't go so well. Everything was inconsistent. The bachelor knew nothing, to his dismay. Even the most casual words of the counselor sounded like nonsense and insanity. The two men looked at each other in silence. When it became clear that it was no good, the bachelor spoke in Latin, hoping to make the other understand a little, but it was no use. April 2, 1801 attack on the British ship. How are you feeling, my dear? The landlady asked, tugging on the counselor's sleeve. At this point the counselor came back to his senses. While he was engrossed in his story he had forgotten everything that had happened up to that point. Oh, dear, where am I? Asked the counselor, and as soon as he remembered this he seemed to become dizzy. Come, we'll have some claret. Mead and some Bremen beer, cried one of the guests. Why, come and join us. 2 serving girls came in. One of them wore a hat with 2 different colors. They went round pouring drinks and bowed. The counselor felt a chill run down his whole body. The sign of a low-class cup made in King Hans' time. Oh, what is this? What is this? Cried the counselor. But he had to drink with her, whether he liked it or not. The guests handled the incident very skillfully. The counselor was extremely disappointed. Someone said, the man is drunk, but he was too angry to admit that this was a lie. All he could do was ask for a droshky, horse-drawn carriage. But everyone wondered if he was speaking Russian. The counselor had never before been among such low and rowdy people. It's as if Denmark has gone back to the pagan times. I've never seen anything so horrible, thought the counselor. But then a thought suddenly occurred to him, and he crawled under the table and tried to get out the door. He did just that, and just as he reached the exit, the others found him. They grabbed him by the feet and pulled him back. Then, to his great delight, his big shoes slipped off, and all the magic disappeared. Then the counselor could clearly see, directly in front of him, a street lamp blazing brightly, and behind it a large building. He looked around, but everything was familiar. It was the same East Street that we see every day in today's world. The counselor was lying on his stomach with his feet against the front door. Directly across the hall, the town watchman was sitting, asleep. "Oh dear! I must have slept in the street and had a dream," cried the counselor. "I see, this is the East Street. It's bright and lively. But the effect of all those pounds is truly frightening." 2 minutes later, the counselor sat calmly in the hackney carriage and was taken to his house in Christianshavn. The counselor remembered all the terrible things and worries he had experienced in the past, and realized that, although there were many bad things in the world today, it was still much better than the old days that had just been taken away. Well, the counselor is a wise man. The Adventures of the Third Night Guard. "Oh dear, there's a pair of shoes lying over there," said the night watchman. "They must belong to the lieutenant on the second floor over there, because they're lying right at the gate." The honest night watchman wanted to ring the bell and give the shoes to their owner. The lights were still on upstairs, but he didn't want to scare the other people in the house, so he left them there. "But I bet it'll be really warm in these," he said to himself. "What fine, soft leather they're made of." The shoes fit the night watchman's feet perfectly. It's a strange world. Right now, the lieutenant should be able to just lie down in that warm bed. But that's not the case. He's walking back and forth in his room. What a lucky man he is. He has no wife or children, and every night he goes out to parties. I'd be a very lucky man if I were him. As the night watchman spoke these words and expressed his heart's wish, the boots he was wearing began to work, and the night watchman's soul was carried smoothly into the lieutenant's body and heart. So the night watchman went into his room on the second floor and held a small piece of rose-colored paper between his fingers. On it was a poem written by the lieutenant himself. Everyone, at least once in their life, feels like putting their heart into song, and when that happens, if you write down what's on your mind on paper, it becomes a poem. So, on the paper was written, "Oh, I wish I was rich. Oh, I wish I was rich. I often thought that. When I was only 2 feet tall, I had many desires. Oh, I wish I was rich, and so I tried to become an officer, with my saber hanging down, and wearing my military uniform. When the time came, I too pretended to be an officer. Now, I can't make much money. Pathetic. God Almighty, please help me." One night, when I was feeling happy and cheerful, a little girl kissed me. I have a mountain of fairy tales, but I'm always poor when it comes to money. A child only needs songs. I have a mountain of songs, but when it comes to money, I'm always poor. God Almighty, as you can see. Oh, I wish I was rich. The prayer began. The child quickly grew into a young lady, a smart, beautiful, and kind-hearted girl. Oh, I want to tell her, if only she would show her kind heart, a wonderful fairy tale that I have in my heart. But I have no money, I can't say it aloud. Poor thing. Almighty God, it's up to you. Oh, I want at least some rest and comfort in return. Then there would be no need to write down my worries on paper. You are the one to whom I gave my heart, so please understand. Please read this song, a song written by a young man. No good, I guess I'll just have to give it to the night like this. The future is dark, what a pitiful man. God Almighty, please bless him. Yes, when people are in love, they write poems like this. But prudent people don't print them. The lieutenant, love, and poverty, this is the shape of a triangle. Or perhaps it's one broken half of the dice of happiness. The lieutenant thought this deeply. So he pressed his head against the window frame, and sighed deeply. The poor night watchman sleeping on the street over there is much happier than I am. He doesn't have anything I think he lacks. He has a home, a wife, and children. He cries when he's sad, and rejoices when he's happy. Oh, if only I could take his place. I'd be much happier than I am now. He's much happier than I am, the lieutenant muttered to himself. And in that moment the night watchman became the same one again. Because, thanks to the boots of happiness, the night watchman's soul had taken over the lieutenant's body, but the lieutenant was even more discontented than the night watchman, and he wanted to become the night watchman again. So, as he wished, the night watchman became the night watchman again. It was a bad dream, said the night watchman. But it was all so ridiculous. I felt like I was the lieutenant on the second floor, but it was not pleasant at all. How could I forget that I have a wife and children waiting to stroke my cheek until I suffocate? The night watchman sat down again, nodding off. His dream was still not clear. His boots were still on his feet. Just then a shooting star slid down across the sky. Oh, a star has flown, said the night watchman. But, no matter how outrageous it may be, there are still many stars left behind. I'd like to get a little closer somehow. I especially want to see the moon. No matter what happens, it's not like a normal star and won't slip out of your hand. My wife's laundry teacher told me that when we die, we fly from star to star. That's a lie, but I think it's a very interesting story. I wonder if there's some way I can fly to the world of stars, and then I can leave my body on these steps. By the way, there are many things in this world that we need to be careful about. Saying, we all need to be especially careful when we're wearing the shoes of happiness. What do you think happened to the night watchman at that time? As far as we know that steam is fast at transporting things. We've tried this on railroads, and seen it when we traveled on a steamship over the sea. But the speed of steam, compared to the speed at which light travels, is like a lazy man stomping along, or a snail crawling. It runs 19 million times faster than a first-rate runner. Electricity is even faster. To die is to be struck in the heart by electricity, and the soul that leaves the body flies away on the wings of electricity. Sunlight travels more than 20 million miles in 8 minutes and 2 or 3 seconds. According to the speed of electricity, the soul travels the same distance as the sun, but in a much shorter time. Traveling between celestial bodies is not so different from the travels of people you know in the same town, or even closer. Between neighbors. But here on Earth, if your heart is electrified, there is a danger that your body will stop working. Unless you are wearing the boots of happiness, as the night watchman was, it's different. In a few seconds, the night watchman had traveled 52,000 miles to the moon. It was made of a different material than the world on Earth, and it was as fluffy as newly fallen snow. The night watchman landed on one of the mountains that you are familiar with, that you have covered in countless circles on the lunar map of Dr. Madrel's lunar world. Inside the ring of mountains, a steep, B-shaped depression was dug deep for miles. At the bottom of the moat was a town, which looked a little like the white of an egg dropped into a glass of water, but it was soft and squishy just like the white of an egg, and towers, round-roofed halls, and sail-shaped buildings, just like those in the human world, floated transparently in the thin air. The Earth, where humans live, hung in the sky above his head like a great, dark red ball of fire. The German astronomer on watch soon encountered many creatures. They were probably the humans of the moon world, but they look very different from us. They were made with a much more certain imagination than the false Herschel could create, and if they were lined up in a row, and painted, they would make a beautiful Arabic pattern. These people also spoke, but no one would have thought that the night watchmen would understand them. And yet it is a wonder that they did, for the human soul has other ways of working than we can imagine. Its astonishing theatrical talents work even in dreams, where acquaintances appear, speaking in their own voices, which are so characteristic of their nature that we cannot imitate them after waking. Why does the soul bring to us people whom it has not remembered for years? It suddenly appears in our souls, bringing with it even the most minute habits. Our souls have a terrible memory. It reveals every sin, every evil thought. It seems like we could write down every single word that has ever entered our minds or reached our lips. Asterisk a false story about the moon published in Germany. The text in brackets is not in the original, but is from the American version. So the night watchman's soul was very good at explaining the things the people of the moon said. They talked about the earth, and wondered if it was a place where humans could live. They said that the air on earth was too heavy, and that it would be impossible for the sensitive moon people to live there. These people believe that humans only live in the world of the moon, because they say that the real world, where the ancient people of the world live, is the moon. These people were also talking about politics. Leaving that aside, let's go back down to the original East Street and see what happened to the body that the night watchman's soul had left there. The night watchman had died and was sleeping on the stairs. The spear with the sword on its head had fallen from its hand, and his eyes were gazing blankly at the world of the moon. The night watchman's body was watching the whereabouts of the honest soul that had gone out in that direction, yearning to go there. "Hey, night watchman, what time is it?" asked a man passing by. But the night watchman was unable to reply. So the man lightly poked the night watchman's nose, and the night watchman lost his body's strength, and fell to the ground, and died. The man who poked the nose was not surprised, because the night watchman had not returned from death. He immediately informed them, and a consultation began, and the next morning, the body had been brought to the hospital. By the way, it would be quite interesting if the soul that had gone to play in the world of the moon came back suddenly, and searched every possible place for the body it had left behind in Higashidori, but could not find it. The soul would probably go to the police first. Then it would probably go to the Personnel Investigation Agency. Then it would begin to investigate the whereabouts of the missing items. After that, it may finally be necessary to visit the hospital. But there is no need to worry. It is a wonderful thing for the soul to take care of itself. It is the body that is absent. As I have said, the night watchman's body was brought to the hospital. He was then placed in the ward. Of course, the first thing to do in cleaning a corpse is to remove the shoes. So the soul had to return. And so it did. And it did. And the corpse began to come to life. The night watchman confessed that it had been the most terrifying night of his life. He said that he would never want to go through such a thing again, even for 1,000 groschen. But now it was all over. That very day, the night watchman was allowed to leave the hospital. But the boots remained in the hospital. A program from the 41st Great Reading Club, a rare journey. Anyone born in Copenhagen should know what the entrance to the Frederick Hospital in that city looks like. But some of you reading this story might not have been born in Copenhagen, so I must start by telling you a little about it. Now, there was a fairly high fence between the hospital and the street, and a thick iron bar, but it was quite thin. They were lined up so close together that even a volunteer assistant who was not very smart would have been able to slip through. So the idea was to slip through here to run some errands outside. But the hardest part of the body was the head. So, as is often the case, here too, the little head turned out to be the happiest. That should be enough of an introduction. Now, there was a young volunteer assistant. Physically speaking, he was a big-headed man, but that night he was working hard. It was raining heavily. But these two things didn't matter, and this man had to go outside. And it was only for about 15 minutes, so he didn't think he would have to ask the gatekeeper to open the gate, because he thought he could just slip through the fence and get out. Suddenly, he noticed the slippers that the night watchman had left there. He had no idea that these were the slippers of happiness. He thought that there was something special to look for on a rainy day like this, and put them on over his shoes. Now, he had never really tried to see if he could get through the fence, so he stood in front of it. "Please let my head stick out," said the assistant. And in an instant, his enormous head, without a word, was easily exposed. That's how much the slippers had prepared. Now, but when he had to get his body out, he got stuck right there. "He's too fat. I thought that his head would be the worst thing to deal with. I guess he can't get it out," said the assistant. So he quickly tried to pull his head back. But it didn't work. It seemed that only his neck could move, and that was it. At first he tried shaking his head. After a while he got disappointed, and he was in a bad mood. Several times. The slippers of happiness had put him in such a pitiful situation. And yet he had not even thought of a single word of happiness or wishing he could be free. Instead, he struggled and thrashed about, but he could not move. The rain was pouring down, making a huge splash. Not a soul was passing by on the road. The gate bell did not ring. How could he get out? At this point, it looked like he would have to stand there until tomorrow morning. So everyone would find him, and send for a blacksmith, and he would cut the iron into pieces with a file. But that kind of work is no easy task. Everyone would come from the poor school in the Blue Building just ahead, and even from the nearby Siemens district, to see the boy with his neck stuck on the punishment block, and it would create a huge crowd, different from the commotion that erupted last year when the large lilies bloomed. "Oh, it's painful. I feel like the blood is rising to my head. I'm going crazy. Yes, I'm going crazy. Oh, I just want to be free, and that's all I need. I should have said this a little earlier." As soon as I said it, my mind was free. The assistant was so shocked by the terrifying sight of the slippers of happiness that he rushed into the house. But he must not think that this was the end of it. Things were about to get even worse. The night passed, and the next day passed without incident. No one came to get the slippers. That evening, there was to be a small reading event on Kanike Street. The hut was packed. The reading program included a new poem. Let us hear it. Now, the subject is, "Grandma's eyes are my grandma, who knows everything." If it was the old days, she would have burned him at the stake right away. If it had happened, she knew everything. And even knew what would happen next year, a God who could see into the 40 years ahead, but she hates to say it. Hey, what will happen next year? It's nothing to do with me. Is it a matter of national importance, or my own life, as expected? Grandma doesn't say anything, but when I still beg, "Hey, you're in a good mood. You tried your best at the beginning, just like always, just one more push. My dear grandson, should I not turn a blind eye to your request? Then I'll grant it once." He finally agreed and lent me his glasses. "Well, I'll go out wherever there's a large crowd and peer into the crowd with my eyes, and then, just like reading the cards of Karuta, I'll be able to see everything, as if I were holding it in my hands." I was also quite interested, but I ran off immediately. So where should I go? Lancerani? It's cold there. Estelgard? Peeved, the rotten swamp. Then, a play? That's an idea. The performance is good, and the audience is full. So tonight's event is decided, so I'll put on my old lady's glasses and take a look. Don't miss it, ladies and gentlemen. I'll read your future with the cards of Karuta, and if it hits, it'll be a comfort. Is that okay? I understand that you won't reply. Now, as a token of my gratitude for your kindness, I will tell you what I have seen with my own eyes. So, I will read the secret of your country's future on the front of the cards. Puts on his glasses. Ah, I see. No, it's funny. I want to show you the mysterious cards. The gentlemen of the cards, lined up in a row, are the well-behaved ladies of hearts. And there, in black, is the club with a spade in the distance. Look, I can see the lady of spades, and the jack of diamonds, and they're telling secrets, and it's like I'm getting drunk just watching them. Your side seems to be very wealthy, and you have a constant stream of customers from other countries. But, it's boring, and I don't care. Now, on to politics. Please wait, it's a newspaper, so read it slowly later and you'll understand. If I talk here, it will disrupt business, and I won't enjoy dinner. In that case, the play will premiere, a new work. It's popular. No, this will mean a fight with the manager. And so, everyone is most concerned about their own situation. I can see that, but I can't really say it, and when the time comes, you'll naturally understand. Of the people here, who is the happiest? The happiest? Well, I can understand that. Yes, well, I'll apologize. I think most people will be disappointed. So, who will live the longest? This gentleman? That lady? Well, if I say that, I'll only make it worse. Then, this one? No? That one? No? Well, I don't know what to do with that one either. It'll just touch someone's mood. I'd rather look into your hearts. You're all thinking, aren't you? Well, are you hoping for something? Like, it's too pointless. You're too ridiculous. Stop with your pointless chatter. If that's the consensus, then yes, I'll stop, I'll shut up. The recitation of this poem was very well done, and the performer did himself a disservice. Among the spectators was a volunteer assistant from Ray's hospital, who looked as if he had completely forgotten about last night's big incident. Since no one came to get them, his heavy boots were still on. And the roads were so rough that this was quite a surprise. The assistant found the poem interesting. What caught his attention was the idea behind it. It would be great if we had glasses like that. If used well, with those glasses, you could see into people's hearts. He thought this was more interesting than seeing what next year will be like now. Because, you can only know what will happen in the future, but it's rare to know what's in people's hearts. So, I decided to look at the line of gentlemen and ladies at the front first. I wondered what it would be like to jump right into their hearts. It's a window, so there are all kinds of things lined up like an open shop. I wonder how my eyes will wander around the shop. I'm sure that lady over there has entered a large haberdashery. This side of the shop must be empty. It hasn't been cleaned in a while. But there must be a shop that sells reliable goods. Oh dear. The assistant sighed and continued thinking. I wonder if there is a shop that sells only reliable goods, but unfortunately there is already a clerk there. That's the problem. Both this shop and that shop said, "Mister, please come in. I want to become a kind of lovely spirit of thought and peer inside their hearts." See, that was all it took for the assistant to get through to the shoes. Immediately the assistant's body curled up, and he began a truly strange journey from the heart to the heart of the spectators in front of him. The first to enter was the heart of a woman, and he felt as if he had entered an operating room at an orthopedic hospital. This is where doctors remove excess flesh from disabled people to improve their appearance. In that room, plaster casts of disabled limbs were leaning against the wall. The only difference was that in orthopedic hospitals, plaster casts are made every time a person comes in, but in this heart, casts are made and stored after the person leaves. The ones here are those of the woman's friends. The imperfections of her body and her heart were preserved there. Soon she entered another woman's house. But this seemed to her like a large, majestic temple. A naked white dove was flying over the high altar. She wanted to kneel down and worship. But she had to enter the next house soon. But she could still hear the organ. And she felt like she had become a different person, better than she was. She felt like she had the right to brag and enter the next church. It appeared as a poor attic room, and inside was a sick mother lying. But the warm light of God's sunshine was streaming in through the open window, and beautiful roses were poking out from a small wooden box on the roof. Two little sky bluebirds were singing a childlike song of joy. Amidst the song, the sick mother was praying for God's blessing for her daughter. Then she crawled on all fours through a butcher's shop packed with meat. There was nothing but meat here. No matter where she went, there was nothing but meat. This was the heart of a rich, wealthy man. Perhaps his name was in the Who's Who directory. This time she entered the heart of the gentleman's wife. Her heart was an old, dilapidated pigeon hut. A statue of the Lord had taken the place of a simple chicken. It was used as a weather vane. It was attached to the door of the hut, and opened and closed as the master's weather vane spun round and round. Then I came into view of a mirror like the ones in Rosenborg Castle. But this mirror was made to look unbelievably large. In the middle of the floor, like the Dalai Lama, sat its humble owner, amazed at the size of his house. Then I was carried into a small needle box, with needles poking through it. I thought this must be the mind of an old girl who cannot marry. But in fact it was not. It was the mind of a young officer with many medals hanging from his neck. But people said he was a man of talent and compassion. When the poor assistant escaped from the mind of the last person in line, he felt completely numb, and could not think straight. He thought that a violent madman had run around with him. Oh dear, what a shock, the assistant sighed. I guess I'm born with a kink. And it's so hot here. All the blood rushes to my head. Then he suddenly remembered the terrible incident from last night, when his head got stuck in the iron fence at the hospital. I must have gotten sick then, the assistant thought. We must do something immediately. The Russian bath might work. In that case, I'd like to sleep on the top shelf. And so he went straight to sleep on the top shelf of the bath. Meanwhile, he was asleep as soon as he put on his kimono, with his boots and slippers still on. Hot drops of water started to fall, drop by drop, on his face. Whoa, he cried suddenly, and went downstairs, intending to take a bath. The bath attendant was so surprised to see the man in the kimono jump out that he let out a loud scream. However, the assistant had enough time to whisper in the bath attendant's ear, "What are you doing?" Well, the first thing he did when he returned to his room was to wear two large Spanish sachets, one around his neck and one on his back. He intended to use them to absorb the mad poison from within his body. The next morning, the assistant had a red, swollen back. This was all the medicine the boots of happiness had bestowed upon him. The transfiguration of the Pentateuch. The night watchman, whom we had not yet forgotten, suddenly remembered the boots he had found and worn all the way to the hospital. He went back, but after asking the lieutenant upstairs and people in the town, he could not find out who they belonged to, so he took them to the police. One of the clerks who had seen the boots said, "They look just like my boots, and compared them to his own. Why, it would be so difficult for even a shoemaker to tell the difference between these two? Secretary. At that moment the servant came in with the documents. The clerk turned around to talk to the man. When he finished, he went back to the shoes, but now he couldn't tell which way was his right or his left. The wet ones must be mine, thought the clerk. But he was wrong. Because those were the lucky shoes. After all, a police official couldn't be sure to make a mistake. So he put them on, hidden the documents inside, and put them under his arm. He had to take them inside, read them, and make a copy. By the way, it was a Sunday morning and the weather was fine. Maybe I should just take a stroll to Fredericksburg, he thought. And headed in that direction. Now, it's rare to find a man as quiet as this young man. It's his duty to take a short walk. It must be good for the body after sitting for a long time. At first, he just walked around blankly. So the boots didn't have a chance to use their magic. As he entered the waterfront of the park, the scribe happened to meet his friend, a young poet. The poet explained that he was leaving on a trip the next day. So you're leaving already? The scribe asked enviously. What a happy and free life. You can fly wherever you want, whenever you want. But when you come with us you have chains on your feet. But those chains must be attached to the breadfruit tree, said the poet. But you don't have to worry about your livelihood. When you get older you get a pension. You, after all, live a better life than me, said the clerk. It must be a pleasure to sit at home and write poetry, and you'll be very popular. I can get by on my own. But you better give it a try, you'll see what it's like to stick your nose into the little things of the bureaucratic business. The poet shook his head. The clerk shook his head as well. After he had insisted on his own opinion, the two of them left. Poets are a strange breed, the clerk thought. I'd like to know what they feel like. I'd like to be a poet myself. I wouldn't complain like those people, of course. Oh, what a wonderful spring for a poet. The air is so clear, the clouds are so beautiful, and the scent of the green young leaves hangs in the air. Yes, I haven't felt anything like this moment in years. So now, it's clear that the clerk had already become a poet. There's nothing particularly noticeable about it. It's ridiculous to think that poets are born completely different from other people. There are many people who have a more poetic temperament than most ordinary people who call themselves poets. But the difference between a poet and a poet is that they remember their thoughts and feelings well, and have the talent to clearly express them in words. But going from a commoner temperament to the talent of a poet is still a big change, and that is what the clerk is doing right now. What a wonderful smell, said the clerk. It reminds me of Aunt Lone's violets. Yes, they were me when I was a child. You see, I hadn't even remembered them for a long time. What a nice lady she was. She lived behind the stock exchange. She always carefully placed a branch or a green twig in water and placed it in her warm room, no matter how cold the winter. Beside the warm violets blooming, I would press a copper coin, heated over a fire against the frozen pane of the window, to make a hole in the window. It was an interesting sight. A ship was frozen in the canal outside. The crew was while they were gone, a lone crow was chirping. Soon, as the spring breeze blew in, something came to life. The ice was broken amid lively songs and shouts. The boat was tarred, the sails were prepared, and soon it was time to set sail for an unknown country. But I'm staying here forever. All year round, I sit in a police chair, watching people receive their passports to go abroad. This is the luck I was born with. Yes, yes, thank you very much. Thinking this, the clerk sighed deeply. Suddenly, she realized, something's wrong. What on earth has happened to me? I've never thought or felt this way before. Perhaps a spring breeze has blown into my heart. I feel a little helpless, but at the same time, I feel good. Thinking this, she casually touched the paper in her closet. No. This will divert my thoughts elsewhere. As the clerk spoke, he suddenly looked at the first sheet of paper, and it read as follows. Mrs. Sigbright, a new tragedy in 5 acts. Oh dear, what is this? And this is my own handwriting. When did I ever write such a thing? A conspiracy at the Opera House Promenade, one person's day of confession. I wonder where I got this. Maybe someone hid it for some reason. Oh dear, here is a letter. It was clearly from the manager of the theater. He wrote that he could not sell your work, and in a very ungrateful tone. The clerk muttered, as he sat down on a bench. His heart danced, he felt revived, and he felt good. He picked a flower nearby and picked it up. It was a small, boring daisy. What the botanist had to lecture on countless times to explain. This flower told us in just 1 minute. It also told us the story of its early life. It also told us how the sunlight made the flower's soft petals open and give off a lovely fragrance. The scribe suddenly thought of the struggle of life. This, too, moved us. Air and light were friends with the flower. But the flower loved light even more, so it always turned its face toward the light. But when the light went out, the flower rolled up its petals and slept in the embrace of the air. It is the light that adorns me, said the flower. But the air will let you breathe, whispered the poet's voice. Then, right nearby, a boy was hitting the top of the drain with a stick. Drops of murky water splashed up onto the green branches. The scribe then thought of the tens of thousands of tiny, invisible creatures that had been hurled high into the air along with the drops. In terms of the proportions of their body sizes, it must have been just like us being hurled high up into the clouds. As the scribe thought this, he felt strange about the way he was gradually changing. I am asleep and dreaming. But it is certainly strange to dream so vividly, and yet in my dream I know that I am dreaming. If only I could somehow remember everything I saw in my dream. Even when I wake up the next day, I feel strangely elated, different from usual. I understand everything clearly, and feel everything vividly. But if I were to remember it tomorrow, it would surely seem very foolish. It has happened to me often. In my dreams I say and hear all sorts of clever and noble things. It is like the gold of the dwarves under the earth. It's a very precious thing. When I receive it, it looks like a beautiful pile of gold, but when I look at it in the light, it turns into pebbles or dead leaves. Oh, the clerk sighed with a bored look on his face, and watched the little bird flitting joyfully from branch to branch and chirping away. The little bird has a much better life than I do. Flying is a great skill. Those born with wings are lucky. I think so. If I could turn into something other than a human, I would like to be a pretty skylark. As soon as he said this, both sleeves of the clerk's dress got stuck to the back of his dress, and became wings. His dress became feathers, and his gold shoes became clogs. The scribe saw his appearance change rapidly, and laughed to himself. I see, now I know I am dreaming. But I have never yet had such a ridiculous dream. And so the scribe, who had turned into a skylark, flew about among the green branches and sang. There was no longer any poetry in his song. He had lost the qualities of a poet. The shoe, like someone who pursues everything to the very core, could only do one thing at a time. When he said he wanted to be a poet, he became a poet. Next, he said he wanted to be a little bird, and he became a little bird. All at once the poet's spirit vanished. This is really interesting, thought the scribe, and he continued to think as he flew. By day, I work in an office, sitting on a chair as hard as a rock, stuffing my head with the most uninteresting legal documents. At night, I dream, turn into a skylark, and fly among the trees in Fredericksburg Park. This would make a great pop comedy. So the clerk's skylark flew down into the grass, turned its head in all directions, and pecked at the grass stalks with its beak. Compared to its size, it was as big as a North African palm branch. Suddenly, it was completely dark all around. It seemed as if something big had dropped on it from above. It was a sailor's boy from Newodle, who had thrown his big hat over the bird. Then a hand came in from below, and squeezed the clerk's skylark's back and wings so tightly that it started chirping. Then, in a surprised voice, he shouted, "You naughty boy, I'm a police officer." But the child only heard the chirping. So the boy smacked the bird's beak, and walked around holding on to it. Presently, on a beach, the boy met two other children. In human society, where status is measured, they would be called children of good standing, but at school, because they were the nobles, they were placed in the lowest class. These children bought the bird for a few silver shillings. So the skylark's clerk was brought again to a house in Gothelstrad in Copenhagen. "It's a good thing it's just a dream," said the clerk. "Otherwise I'd really get angry. First I was the poet, and now I'm the skylark. And it was the poet's temperament that turned me into a bird. Now that I've fallen into the hands of children, it's a pity. I have no idea what the end will be." Soon the children took the skylark into a very nice room. A fat, smiling wife welcomed them. She must have been the children's mother. But the mother, calling the skylark an inferior wild bird, would not readily consent to letting it into the house. After some begging, she finally got permission, but only for one day. So the skylark had to be put in an empty cage by the window. "The little parrot will be very happy," the lady said, laughing at the large parrot that was swinging elegantly in its ring in the beautiful brass cage above. "Today is the little parrot's birthday," the lady said, pamperingly. "And so this little wild bird must have come to congratulate you." The little parrot made no reply. It just swayed elegantly. Then the lovely canary, which had been brought here last summer from the fragrant forests of a warm southern country, began to sing in a loud voice. "Such a noisy thing," said the lady, and hung a white handkerchief over the cage. "Pee, pee," sighed the canary. "It's a terrible snow clearing," he said, and fell silent. The clerk, or rather the lowly wild bird the lady spoke of, was put in a small cage close to the canary, not far from the parrot. The parrot had only one human line, and that was, well, to be a man, which sometimes sounded quite dumb. The rest of the squealing, like the canary's song, was completely incomprehensible to humans. However, the scribe, who was also one of the birds, understood what they were saying. "I was flying under the green palm trees and the apricot trees with their white blossoms," sang the canary. "I was flying with my brothers and sisters over beautiful flowers and mirror-like green. At the bottom of the lake, the grass and trees were swaying back and forth. Then we met a beautiful parrot who told us many long stories." "That's a wild bird," the parrot replied. "They have no education." "Well, you have to become a man. Why don't you laugh? When the ladies and the customers laugh, you laugh too. It's a flaw to have no interest in entertainment. Well, you have to become a man. You remember, don't you? You remember the pretty girls who pitched their tents under the blossoming trees and danced, and the sweet fruit that grew in the grass in the field and flowed with cold juice." "Yes, I remember that," the parrot replied. "But here at home, I live a much better life. I'm fed and treated well. I couldn't ask for anything better. I'd rather become a man." You have what they call the soul of a poet. I have deep knowledge and wit. You have genius, but no sense. You're born with a high-pitched voice, and when you start acting out of nowhere, you're covered in a blanket. That's not the case with me. Why am I so cheap? Just this big beak has a certain quality to it. And with this beak, I can sprinkle my wit and make people happy. I'd rather become a man. Oh, my dear, flower-filled tropical homeland, sang the canary. I will praise the green grove and the quiet cove whose branches reflect the mirror like water. I will praise the joy of the birds who shine there, where the desert spring trees grow. Come on, please, stop making such pathetic noises, said the parrot. Sing something that will make me laugh. Laughter is a sign of a noble heart. Do dogs and horses laugh? Well, they don't laugh. Laughter is only given to humans. Ha ha ha. The parrot laughed, and concluded, well, you have to become a human. Hello, hello, there's a little gray Danish bird, the canary called to the skylark. You have become a man, too. I see, it must be cold in the forests of your country. But there is still freedom there. Jump out. Jump out. You forgot to close the door of your cage. The upper window is open. Run, run out. As the canary spoke, the clerk followed suit and ran out of the corner. At that moment, the half-open door of the next room creaked, and a pet cat with fiery green eyes came running in. Then, suddenly trying to chase the skylark, the canary flew around in the cage. The parrot flapped its wings and cried, "Oh, it's time to become a man." The clerk was so shocked he ran out of the window onto the roof and into the street. Finally he became tired and had to rest for a while. The house across the street looked comfortable and livable. There was an open window, so he jumped in through it and found himself in his own study room. The skylark jumped down onto the desk there. Well, it's about becoming a man, he said, imitating a parrot. In an instant he was back in the clerk's place. He just sat on the desk. My, what a surprise, said the clerk. Why am I on such a high plane? And I ended up sleeping so soundly, it was a restless dream. It was all about nonsense, it was so ridiculous. The best thing about being given 6 pairs of shoes the next morning, the secretary was still in bed when he heard a knock at the door. It was a young seminarian who lived next door to him on the same floor, who came in and said, "Please lend me your shoes," said the student. "The garden is very humid, but the sun is shining brightly. I'd like to go down and have a smoke." After putting on the shoes for the student, he soon went into the garden. There were plum trees and pear trees in the garden. But how could such a small garden be so impressive in the capital? The student walked up and down the garden paths. It was barely 6 o'clock, and the sound of the mail coach horn could be heard on the road. "Ah, travel, travel," cried the student. "This is the greatest happiness in the world. This is the goal for which I have the highest hopes. Only by traveling can I calm my anxious feelings, but it must be far away. I want to see beautiful Switzerland. I want to go to Italy." But it was a good thing that the boots had already shown the sign. Otherwise, he and others, would have flown too far away to be managed. Now, the student was on his journey. He was in the middle of Switzerland, crammed into an express coach with 8 other passengers. I had a headache, my neck was heavy, my legs were swollen from blood loss and my boots were too tight. He was swaying, not knowing whether he was awake or asleep. In his right pocket he had his bill of credit, and in his left pocket his passport. A gold Louis d'or was sewn into a small leather pouch in his chest. As he dozed off he dreamed that he had lost one of these important objects. So he jumped up, as in a fever, and quickly moved his hands making a triangle from right to left, and then touched his chest to see if he had still not lost it. The bat, his hat, and his walking stick were dangling wildly in the net over his head, and blocking his view of the beautiful outdoors. But he could only peer out from underneath it, and instead the student recited in his mind a poem that a certain person we know, who we might call a poet, had written in Switzerland, but had not yet been printed. And here, the beauty of the heart unfolded, revealing the enticing figure of Mont Blanc. If the sky did not clear so quickly, it would be a pity, and I should have stayed facing this view forever. All the nature he could see was large, splendid, and dim. The fir forests, on the high mountains, looked like grass thickets. The mountain peaks were hidden by the clouds. Soon it began to snow, and a cold wind blew. "Oh, it's cold," the student sighed. "I wish this was on the other side of the Alps. It's always summer there, and I'm sure I can get money with this bill of exchange. I can't enjoy Switzerland to the fullest because I'm worried about money. I wish I could get there quickly." With these words, the student was already on the other side of the mountains, in the middle of Italy, between Florence and Rome. The Trasimene Lake shone like a golden flame in the evening, surrounded by the dark blue mountains. This is where Hannibal had defeated Flammius long ago, and there grapevines gently entwined their green fingers. A group of cute, half-naked children were keeping a flock of black pigs in a fragrant grove of holly trees by the roadside. If this scenery could be depicted exactly as it was in a painting, everyone would exclaim, "Oh, what a wonderful Italy!" Quote, but for the time being, neither the seminarian nor his traveling companions in the same carriage uttered the words. Thousands of poisonous flies and gadflies flew into the carriage in swarms. Everyone waved myrtle branches around like madmen, but the flies stung just fine. Not a single passenger in the carriage was bitten, and their face swelled up. The poor horse was left to be swarmed by the flies as if it were rotten meat. Every now and then, a rider would get off and brush off the insects that were gathering there, and only then would he feel some relief. Now the sun was setting. It was only for a short time, but an icy coldness permeated everything, which was not pleasant at all. But the surrounding mountains and clouds were a beautiful green tone, like those in old paintings, and the light was clear and dull. Well, if you go there yourself, you can't understand it just by reading what is written. It was a scene that cannot be described. These travelers thought the same. But they were empty, and their bodies were exhausted. All they wanted was to stay for the night. But how would that turn out? More than the beautiful nature, their hearts were drawn to that. The road passed through a forest of olivines. The students felt like they were back home, passing through the knotty willow trees. Soon he found a lonely inn. A group of lame beggars were stationed at the entrance. The fastest of them looked like a famine victim grown into a man. The rest were either blind or lame, and either turned with their hands or clasped their rotten fingers together. A truly wretched man, wrapped in rags, as he came out. "Excellenta miserabili," the beggar sighed, holding out his limp hand. The innkeeper, barefoot, with a dull, uncombed head, would welcome his guest wearing only a dirty bluesjacket. The door was fastened with a rope. The floor of the room looked like it had been dug up after half. The bricks had collapsed. Bats were flying around under the ceiling, and a foul smell emanated from inside the room. "Sir, how pitiful." "That's right, we should just bring the dining table into the stable," said one of the travelers. "We can breathe better there." The window was opened. They thought that this would let in a bit of fresh air. But even faster than the wind, a cunning hand appeared, and continued to snort, "Miserabili isrenza." There was a lot of graffiti on the wall, but half of it was the opposite of asterisk, Bella. Italia. Italy is a great place. Dinner was served. It was a watery soup flavored with pepper and some pungent fat. The fat was the main flavor of the salad. Moldy eggs and roasted chicken combs were the main delicacy. The grapes tasted strange. It was an unbearable mixture. At night, they lined up their suitcases and pulled them up to the door. While the others slept, one of the travelers took turns staying up to keep watch. So the seminarian was the first to take the role. Oh, how oppressive it was. The heat was suffocating. Bang, bang, they came flying and stabbed him. The miserabili on the outside continued to cry even in his dreams. That's a good way to travel, said the seminarian. I wish humans didn't have bodies. I wish I could let my body rest and let my mind wander. Wherever I go, I encounter dissatisfaction that weighs on my mind. I wanted something a little better than my current circumstances. Yes, something a little better, the best. But where is that? What is it? I know very well what I am looking for in my heart. I want to aim for happiness. The happiest of all things. Then, as soon as he said it, the student had returned inside. Long, white curtains hung from the window. And in the middle of the room, a black can was placed. Inside, the student had died and was sleeping peacefully. His wish was fulfilled, his body was at rest, and his mind was traveling freely. No man can be happy until he is in his grave. These were the words of the Greek wise man Solon. Here, these words have been newly proven. All corpses are immortal sphinxes. The sphinx before us in the black can also answers with these words, written just 3 days before its death. Great death. Your silence inspires fear. Is the temple graveyard the only thing you have left on earth? Will your soul never see Jacob's ladder? Is there no other way to be resurrected than to become grass in the graveyard? The world often overlooks even the deepest sorrows. You will walk your final path alone. And the duties you bear in this world are inevitably heavy. Heavier than the earth that presses against the walls of your coffin. Asterisk the ladder that Jacob saw connecting the earth and heaven. Genesis chapter 28. 12. 2 figures were flickering in the room. We both know them. They were the Lady Worry and the servant of the goddess of happiness. They looked over the dead man. Worry said, "Look, what kind of happiness your shoes have brought, but they have brought long-lasting good fortune to the man who is lying here." Well, how? Worry said. This man went out on his own, so he was not yet called. His spirit is not yet strong, so he has not dug up the treasure that he should have dug up. I will do him a favor. And so, Worry removed the shoes from the student's feet. Then, the sleep of death ended, the student woke up and stood up. Worry disappeared, and with it, the shoes disappeared too. Worry must have made them its own and kept them. That's that.